Hello all, and this video is going to look to introduce Wittgenstein's early work and themes within his philosophy and critiques following along with the empiricist British tradition and I think the best way to really go about that would actually be within the Tractatus's introduction, which was done by Bertrand Russell, because we had talked about Russell recently on the channel. And so, if we're going to pull at the threads here, we want to look at how Russell and the empiricists commit to the hypothetical deductive, as we've talked about, of scientific explanation having a structure of a deductive system. And so, of course, as we saw with the 19th century, this notion really, growing outside of just, the sciences of the likes of chemistry and the likes of that into a social science with Mill, of course. And so you have the broad hypothesis as the structure, as seen with Russell's logical atomism, which is an organization of epistemology into premises for a hypothesis. And so we've been following that trajectory of the disciplines, using the scientific method going forward through the 19th century and into the 20th century, as we'll see with logical positivism as well. And is the case with early Wittgenstein here. And so just to rehash with the universal usage of this method of all science and really human knowledge as a whole. And so, of course, when we're referring to scientism, which is, of course, that method as the only acceptable way that we can have reliable knowledge, as we've seen. But if we were going to outline the Tractatus and look at how Bertrand Russell, passes the torch, if you will, to Wittgenstein, at least for us on the channel. Russell, in preface, he talks of the relationship of words and things, how Wittgenstein starts, and how philosophy misplaces this and is ignorant of this misuse of language. And so this is going to be very influential for the likes of the positivists. And as we saw with referencing before, I don't know if I named it actually outright, but Russell has a work on mysticism and logic, which talks about the misapprehension, if you will, of metaphysical thinking and how there's no real empirical grounding for metaphysics, and instead wants to turn to what he believes Wittgenstein seeks to do, or at least the early Wittgenstein, with ideal language. And so examining ideal language is a strictly logical way for language where you have that one-to-one factor towards nouns referring to one fact, leaving no real room for misplacement within philosophical thinking or ambiguity or double meaning. You have the logical structure of one word to one thing, to one fact or one atomic fact. And so atomic facts one-to-one with the atomic propositions, as Russell claims this to be within Wittgenstein's work. So Wittgenstein himself, who was Austrian-born, had his philosophical teaching taught and studied within Cambridge, and of course is well versed into the likes of David Hume and John Stuart Mill, and then Russell, of course. So with Wittgenstein, he deals with the problems of philosophy and the reason they propose as the logic of our language is a misunderstanding or a misapprehension. But what is, of course, the logic of language is Wittgenstein's logical structure of language, the form in itself within subject and predicate. And so, in particular, when we talk about subjects and predicates, the structure is asserting within language. And so facts or words are signs or names which do not assert logical use of language, which of course is a misunderstanding for philosophy, but language as a whole. And so the Tractatus is going to look as to summarize what we can speak about, what can be said at all can be said clearly. What we cannot talk about clearly must be passed over in silence. And of course, this is a famous Wittgenstein line that is repeated rather early on, and then is the final line actually within this book. And to continue on some of his famous coinage, the world is all that is the case. And so, in that regard, the world is a totality of facts as opposed to things, which of course is a radical difference from discussions of what objects and things are. The world is a totality of facts for Wittgenstein. But of course, what are facts and things? A fact is the existence of a state of affairs, which of course you can see the lineage here with Russell and molecular or atomic facts, as we referred to in last videos. Whereas states of affairs are combinations of objects or things, and things are constituents of states of affairs. Words name things, and things are constituents of state of affairs, and facts are states of affairs. And so Wittgenstein wants to hone in on how one word can have many different signages or mean a bunch of different things. And so in his example of green, green can be a person, Mr. Green, for example, or it could be a property, such as Mr. Green is envious of someone or something, and the green could be a place, or the green, is something like on a golf course, trying to hit onto the green. So words have, very different meanings and signage within language. And so it could be a place or a quality. And so this language or this use of language is confused and riddled with ambiguity, which of course is very problematic if you're going to have philosophical discussion within this language structure and not have an ideal language. But for Wittgenstein, when we turn to picture facts, which is one of his interesting contributions, picture facts, just to use the green example, we picture green as green with envy in our minds or our mental states, or picture the green on the golf course. The picture is the mental state, is a mental model of reality within the picture. However, of course, the picture contains elements such as objects or things. Things are objects represented by the elements in the picture of the way we represent our facts. The mental picture of a fact, which is made up of elements in the mental picture referred to by words corresponding to those states of affairs that we talked about earlier. And so the picture itself is a state of affair, and present states of affairs that I have this picture in my mind, which gives meaning onto something. And so this, of course, leads to how he wants to, find identity within pictures and states of affairs, and how this will complement towards the logical form of language. And so, of course, a picture, or the mental aspect of it, it depicts or corresponds between things or objects. The mental picture may be made up of words or descriptions, but they themselves are not the states of affairs it refers to. And so the logical form to language, which can be identical to the logical form of objective states of affairs. And so a logical picture of facts is a thought or proposition perceived by sense perception. And so if we're going to discuss now his picture theory of meaning, which is influential, mental representations, or our thoughts, are pictures corresponding to states of affairs or facts. And so denotational or extension of a noun, an emphasis on the extensional meaning of language, this goes with, it's sort of a pass down from Hume and matters of fact, which of course is the empiricist notion of meaning. Of course, with Mill, we talked about how the permanence of mind and body and the sensory output put into it gives us meaning, which for Wittgenstein is then translated into Russell's conception of logical atomism. And of course, this is going to be highly influential for the likes of A.J. Ayer and his theory of verifiability. But as for, of course, with Hume, matters of fact, he, of course, critiqued philosophical language and metaphysics, where, language was rendered useless. That was not set in matters of fact, or in this case with Wittgenstein, states of affairs. But now if we were going to move on to signs and symbols, a word, there is a difference here for Wittgenstein. A word is a sign. One and the same sign can be common to multiple symbols, however. So of course there's, one word doesn't just have simply one sign, but it could have multiple symbolic meanings, just as with the example of green earlier, as we discussed. There's the person green, or the quality green, or the state of affair of being envious, or the symbol of the color quality. And so this is, of course, to bridge together with his philosophical problems, such as discussions on the mind and the body. And so the mind and body, the sign and the symbol, it represents of a misunderstanding of the logic of language, referring to the mind as a sort of metaphysical entity as opposed to the actual empirical processes that come about with the mind. And so sign language that he wants to aim for is governed by syntax or symbolic language, or symbolic logic, I should say. And so when he talks of nonsense, or discussions of the nonsense, nonsense is what is a referent word that does not have empirical output. And so there is a nonsensical use of language that lacks the empirical reference from the sciences towards the data of empirical sensation. And so metaphysical language, therefore, is nonsensical, or that it doesn't have the verifiability of the empirical nature. And so this, of course, leads to what is philosophy for Wittgenstein then. If there's no metaphysics, there's no empirical data for such language, then, where does philosophy actually lie within for Wittgenstein? And so Wittgenstein says that philosophy analyzes language for that empirical reference of whether or not something is nonsensical or not. Philosophy then is simply the logic of language used to reference a way to scientific understanding of problems. Philosophy isn't a doctrine but a body of activity. To do philosophy, to act upon philosophy, and not in a sort of doctrine, but as a body of activity, to actually do philosophy. And I was thinking of when I used to talk about in my early essays on the channel about a discipline among disciplines that look to bridge together all of these different scientific notions and different disciplines that are kind of becoming astray. There's not much overlap anymore, as opposed to prior philosophical discussion where most essays and journals, as we discussed in prior centuries, actually combine the sciences and philosophy and metaphysics together. To me, of course, this is a problematic in how one discipline can have very different conceptions and notions about where their discipline actually stands in the greater context of one's life or matters of facts or states of affairs, to use Wittgenstein's language. And so in some extent, I think that Wittgenstein here, with his talk of philosophy as a sort of logic of the language, using it as a sort of way to plug in empirical data from these different disciplines, it reminds me a lot of the discipline of disciplines that I've talked about, or the necessary conditions for that. And so philosophical propositions don't depict reality, so philosophy isn't for inquiry into truth for Wittgenstein. It is the job of science and analyzing the actual data output from sensation itself, whereas philosophy is sort of a guidance towards finding the proper disciplines or the proper logic towards that. And so in his critiques, of course, he has to look at the uniformity of nature or induction. And so his problem is that law cannot be of logic, since its proposition of empirical data lies within empirical data. There's no actual one-to-one law for something like that. You're using empirical data that is coming in. And so when he talks of laws of causation, the law of causation is not a law, but only the form of a law, empty form, in which particular causal laws may correlate. But you don't actually have a sort of formal stand-all causality law. It is just simply correlates, as opposed to using a uniformity of nature as prior empiricists try to set forth. And so induction is only a psychological justification grounded in belief, which of course Hume would say the importance of belief for the human condition. You can see a sort of hand down from that. And so there's a belief in causality by virtue of our constant expectations or habits. And so if we're going to, of course, move along here, then when it comes to things like ethics and moral values, value isn't empirically observable. It must lie outside of what is happening outside of the world. And so when he talks of things like death and the meaning of life, there's no empirical way of proving or demonstrating such things. And even if there was these sort of metaphysical discussions or ethics, then this problemization or this solution is outside of the bounds of life itself, because of course there's no empirical way of proposing that the human soul or the condition goes beyond just your given body or experience. And so if that was the case, even if it was, we have no way of sort of demonstrating it in that empirical capacity, and so therefore it's outside the bounds of life for Wittgenstein. And so it's impossible for propositional ethics, because ethics cannot be put into words as such from being outside of the world. And so when a law such as "thou shalt not," one has the inkling of what if I do? And so our question really isn't about ethical or moral virtue, but is about the consequences of actions, and that all bridges together with the idea of a reward or a punishment to come from good deeds or from consequences of bad deeds in the act of itself. And there's no real ethical doctrine or transcendence above that. You only have the empiricist consequence and reward within ethical discussion then. And so what is the function of ethical language? Wittgenstein actually truly doesn't have an answer. However, as we'll see, other positivists are going to enter the fray and try to answer this with things like the emotive idea, where we have feelings about these moral arguments, feelings as opposed to stating matters of fact. And so, of course, this is going to be influential to emotivist theory of ethics, as we'll see. So, as we continued with death, death for Wittgenstein is an event in life, not to live to experience death, as we have no empirical knowledge of that. And so there's no guarantee, again, of the empiricist towards survival after your human body then. This is outside of space and time then. And so if there's, problems within life, the meaning comes from, within life. And if there is no life, then there is no problem. And so this, in a way, ends the book with how, the correct method of philosophy then is to say nothing which cannot be said, whatever someone else wanted to say that failed. And so the certain meanings of signs within his language. And so what we cannot speak about in empirical propositions, we must pass over in silence, as the famous line goes to end the Tractatus. But yeah, this is just a look at early Wittgenstein and his views of ethics and how one might live their life within empirical verifiability, and of course that continuing tradition that we've been talking about from the 19th century empiricists that looks to eliminate or scrutinize metaphysical discussion that doesn't have verifiability, and of course his extremely influential talks of the logic of language. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I will return soon with content on the positivists.